have more demand for white tigers. My experience, I know lots of people like the yellow one.
Zoopark is vergoederd werk, twee non-selling animals.
I think there's ways, right?
No, Zoopark is non-selling. Selling.
The commercial tiger trade in Europe is big business. It's growing and it's an industry out of control. Europeans watch television programs like The Tiger King open-mouthed, but many don't realize it's not just an Asian or American phenomenon. Europe has its fair share of irresponsible tiger kings also. Unscrupulous traders and owners are subjecting these animals to terrible mistreatment throughout the continent, and this legal industry is now fueling an illegal trade. PAWS is a global animal welfare organisation providing species-appropriate safe homes for rescued animals all over the world. And for decades, PAWS have been rescuing tigers abused or abandoned in Europe. Our sanctuaries, however, are not a full solution. The tigers we rescue are a small minority of the hundreds in Europe we believe to be still suffering in appalling conditions. In 2018, we alerted EU politicians across several countries that the welfare of these animals is not protected by law and that tigers are being bred for a commercial trade that also includes a trade in their parts. At the time, we only had anecdotal evidence, and we needed proof that this problem was not just a few isolated incidents, but a problem that existed across Europe. This motivated us to launch an investigation to discover the full extent of tiger trade in Europe, specifically looking at those behind the trade and the links to illegal trafficking. How's it going? Can you give me an indication of the history of CITES and how we got to where we are?
Yeah, so CITES was adopted in 1975. Most tigers have been on Appendix 1 since then, so that prohibits any commercial international trade. There's also an interpretation in the convention that a captive bred specimen of an Appendix 1 species can be treated as Appendix 2, therefore could be traded with permits. But for some species, such as tigers, there are additional decisions have been adopted that should guide parties in implementing the convention. In 2007, because there was a lot of concern around the impact of trade in captive bred tigers, a decision was adopted that says tigers should not be bred for trade in their parts and derivatives. In the case of 1469, the EU was actually instrumental in getting that decision adopted. They were a really strong voice for tiger conservation and against tiger farming. As you found, there are still issues in Europe. There are questions around, has the EU cleaned up its own backyard first? There's a risk that the existence of all of these issues of export of captive bred tiger parts in the EU could be weakening the bloc's ability to really lobby and advocate for better protections and more action in other countries where we see really large-scale trade in captive bred tigers.
So we wrote to the Commission together, questioning why there was still a commercial trade in parts and derivatives from the European Union. And the answer we got that CITES was being implemented, but it quite clearly isn't when they still allow a commercial trade in parts.
Well, the decision obviously should be implemented, but isn't being implemented sufficiently at the moment. Parties that take their international obligations seriously should also be making every effort to implement the letter of resolutions and decisions, because they're essential in making sure that the convention is fit for purpose. The text was drafted in 1975 and we're living in a very different world now. So these resolutions and decisions really are essential to make sure that the convention does what it's supposed to do, which is prevent the extinction of wild species of fauna and flora from trade.
Without Appendix 1 protection, tigers in our continent are being let down by an unsatisfactory patchwork of laws. Each European country is different. Places like Italy permit tigers to perform in circuses. In the UK, it is acceptable to privately own tigers, but not have them in circuses. In others like Spain, France, and Germany, there's very little regulation at all. So in 2019, PAWS went to find out exactly how many tigers were being held in captivity in Europe. To do that, we sent Freedom of Information requests to 28 member states and 8 neighbouring countries. Out of that number, we got 17 countries replied with numbers, 13 of those being EU member states. 10 countries replied that they could not provide the numbers, and 9 countries did not reply at all. In some cases, knowing what ministry was responsible for recording tiger numbers was not even difficult for us, but it was difficult for the member states themselves. Sometimes they didn't actually know within their own internal ministries who was responsible. In most countries, people did not have record keeping and data keeping on births, deaths, effective registration processes. European authorities are aware of at least 913 tigers, a third more than officially registered by CITES. And if countries aren't aware of how many tigers are kept within their jurisdictions, how are they able to monitor how many are sold and trafficked?
There is no central database where registration is kept of tigers and where they end up after trading them across the EU, which means people don't fear the consequences of trading cubs on the internet by whatever means or methods. Tiger cubs are made available to the highest bidder online on websites like Animalia or social platforms like Facebook. And it's shockingly easy. You just fill in the word tiger into the search function, one click, and there's all these advertising. Especially cubs are incredibly lucrative. PAWS has documented incidents in France where facilities charge 150 euros for a selfie with a tiger and up to 300 euros for a private photo shoot or a feeding session. When the tigers are too old to be handled, they quickly lose their commercial value to their owners. We found online advertisements of tigers for sale in France, in Germany, Spain, just to name a few countries. In one case, 10 tigers were illegally transported from Italian circus owners. The cargo was stopped at the Polish-Belarusian border because of missing visa papers of the drivers. But still, the truck managed to pass through several member states before reaching Poland with an illegal cargo of 10 tigers in horrific conditions. Sadly, one of the tigers died. An official at the scene speculated that the traders did not have any interest in the health of the tigers, which indicates that the tigers were likely to be used for their bones in the production of traditional medicine. CITES papers mentioned that these tigers were sold to a zoo in Dagestan, but no legitimate zoo would have allowed such a transport. Furthermore, the export papers should never have been granted by Italian authorities given the conditions of the transport and without checking the importer details.
There's a lot of money there.
In Lithuania, our investigative work exposed a big cat trader selling tiger cubs. This trader openly offered to manipulate CITES papers, declaring the cub was older than in reality so it could be sold quicker. He claimed he could easily transport big cats through Latvia, Germany, UK, Belgium, Spain or Poland, and also supply traders in Asia. The trader offered to sell the 4 weeks old cub for 6,000 euros, but went on to explain that dead tigers are more profitable, with a dead tiger being worth up to 15,000 euros, as it will be used for its skin, its bones and its claws. We informed the CITES authorities of Lithuania, like we always inform other authorities of other member states. But to be honest, I could name another 10 illicit traders, private keepers or breeders who commercially exploit and sell tigers across Europe.
PAWS advocates that the commercial trade of tigers and tiger parts should be banned entirely, because not only are tigers being treated cruelly, but the legal trade is providing cover for illegal activity. Between 1999 and 2016, 1,412 live tigers were legally exported from Europe, and 161 were sent to various Asian countries. Shockingly, countries like Germany and the Netherlands have repeatedly given trade permits for tiger parts under the CITES purpose code for commercial purposes. In Asia, the demand for European tigers is high. Our contacts tell us that this is because European tigers are considered genetically superior and can be used as breeding stock on tiger farms. Our investigations proved this when Vietnamese trader Bui Hong Tui was recorded offering European tigers for sale for $22,000 US in Vietnam.
Ông đi lên tới 250 kg. Hổ bên châu Âu nó cao to hơn, tức là nặng cân hơn và to hơn. From zero, big road and stronger. Yeah.
European countries are not only complicit in breeding tigers to be exported to Asia, as there are also examples of commercial breeding in Europe for an illegal trade in parts and derivatives. Our investigations revealed that Czech trader Ludvík Barosek was offering to sell tigers and other big cats to Chinese buyers. Shortly after, he was arrested as a dead tiger and equipment used to cook tiger bone glue was seized on his property.
After we shared the results with Czech authorities and following the raids and arrests of Barosek, the minister decided to suspend all commercial export of tigers. Although commendable, this move remains largely symbolic because as a trade bloc, the EU needs to end the trade altogether. The EU should use the precautionary principle and issue trade measures to end the commercial trade in captive tigers and their parts right now. To get national and EU authorities on board, PAWS has released several reports to highlight that this is an EU-wide problem that needs an EU approach.
We always care about what the general public has to say. So when the campaign started, we launched a petition. Since we gathered about 250,000 signatures. That's clear to us. It's not that people don't care about the issue, it's that they don't know. We realized the more information we shared about the tiger trade and the cruelty behind it, the more people wanted to find out about it. We commissioned a public polling exercise by Kantar Public. A staggering majority of 91% of people from countries all across Europe agree that captive tigers deserve to be protected and deserve the same protection as the ones in the wild. Members of the European Parliament also signed a pledge to support a ban on the tiger trade.
Wherever you look around Europe, citizens are united in their concern for wildlife species. Charismatic animals like tigers, elephants, and rhinos play a huge role in our collective imagination. That cuts across political and geographic divides. And it cuts across all age groups as well. As policymakers, we should do all we can to translate the citizens' concerns into protection measures.
PAWS has brought to our attention that although the Convention on Trade in Endangered Species opposes the commercial breeding and trade in tigers for their parts, member states continue to issue trade permits for commercial trade in captive bred tigers and tiger parts. Most people in Europe find this abhorrent. But there is a reluctance to deal with the situation due to foreseeable problems, like what to do with tigers when they are confiscated, how to monitor the exploding captive tiger population, and to track where these animals end up eventually. The member states and the EU must do more to tackle the commercial tiger trade. The EU Green Deal, the Biodiversity Strategy 2030, and the EU Action Plan against wildlife trafficking are excellent opportunities to acknowledge that we need to restrict legal wildlife trade.
Como ponente del informe de la estrategia de biodiversidad del Parlamento Europeo, me preocupa mucho la propagación de patógenos zoonóticos desde animales a seres humanos y entre especies. Y la forma en que el comercio de vida silvestre, tanto el ilegal como el legal, contribuye a ello.
A SARS-like virus which has infected hundreds in China.
La estrategia de biodiversidad 2030 tiene que ser clara y reconocer esta amenaza a la biodiversidad, por lo que exijo a la Comisión Europea a que tome medidas contundentes para poner fin al comercio de tigres.
The lack of regulation and booming tiger trade in Europe is not just creating misery for European captive tigers, it fuels poaching of the species in the wild. We cannot ignore this issue any longer. We call on the Commission and Member States to support issuing EU trade measures to end the commercial trade in tigers and their parts.